This is VOA News. I'm Marissa Melton. As a group of U.S. nationals is escorted safely out of Sudan, some people are going back to the capital city, despite new bursts of gunfire and heavy artillery. AP correspondent Karen Chamas reports.
As the battle for power between Sudan's two top generals continues, over 400 civilians have died so far, with thousands more displaced. However, despite the huge numbers trying to get out, there are some who are making their way back to the war-torn country on a ship from Saudi Arabia to Sudan, so they can be with their families. Ashraf Ahmed, travelling to Sudan, lost his mother, sister and daughter in the fighting. Holding back the tears, he told a reporter,
"I have been one of the losers of this war."
In Khartoum, clashes continued around the presidential palace, the headquarters of the state broadcaster and a military base. The battles sent thick columns of black smoke billowing over the city skyline. I'm Karen Chamas.
Dozens of buses were seen lining up on the Egypt-Sudan border crossing as the waiting times increased with the rising influx of Sudanese fleeing the fighting. Satellite images on Friday showed congestions of trucks and buses lining up in different directions as they prepared to cross the border. Since the fighting broke out between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces on April 15th, thousands of Sudanese have fled to neighboring countries, including Egypt, Ethiopia, Chad, and South Sudan. Police in Cleveland, Texas, said Saturday that a gunman shot dead five neighbors, including an 8-year-old child, after some of them asked him to stop shooting a semi-automatic rifle in his front yard. The local sheriff, Greg Caper, said police are still looking for the suspect. He's been charged with 5 counts of murder. Police were looking for him in a nearby wooded area. The sheriff said 10 people were in the house when the gunman started shooting. 5 survived. VOA News. Rescue operations have been completed in the city of Uman in Ukraine after a massive Russian missile strike early Friday hit a residential building, killing 23 people, including 6 children. The Ukrainian interior minister said rescue teams recovered 22 bodies from under the rubble, while one victim died later in the hospital. In Dnipro, airstrikes killed a 2-year-old and her mother. The British defense minister said Saturday that cruise missile strikes that Russia launched on Friday against Ukraine suggest what it called a departure in Russia's use of long-range strikes. The U.S. Army has grounded all of its non-critical flight missions until pilots can receive new training. AP correspondent Jackie Quinn.
This safety stand-down comes in the wake of Thursday's deadly mid-air collision between 2 Army Apache helicopters returning from a training mission over Alaska. There was also a crash last month in Kentucky that killed 9 soldiers. All aviation units are ordered to review the maintenance of their aircraft, pilot training, and safety precautions. An Army spokesman says the suspension of air operations is effective immediately. Active duty units will undergo new training the first week of May, while reserve units will have until May 31st. I'm Jackie Quinn.
There's growing frustration over the wait for the settlement with the company that made OxyContin, one of the drugs blamed for the opioid crisis in the United States. AP's Julie Walker has more.
More than a year after the maker of the drug reached a tentative settlement over the toll of opioids, the money isn't flowing yet. That's because a federal court is still considering whether it's lawful to give members of the Sackler family who own Purdue Pharma protection from civil lawsuits in exchange for their contribution to the settlement, which is the company itself, and up to $6 billion in cash. A federal appeals court heard arguments on the matter a year ago, but has not issued a ruling. Lawyers on multiple sides of the case have asked the court to issue an opinion or at least a timeline. I'm Julie Walker.
A former U.S. national security advisor has called for deeper interaction between his country and Taiwan during a visit to the self-ruled island, which has seen increasing military threats from China. John Bolton, a potential Republican presidential candidate in 2024 and a former member of the Trump administration, said at a pro-Taiwan independence event on Saturday that national security teams from both sides must develop contingency plans on how to respond to actions Beijing might take. He warned once an attack occurs, it would be too late. More on this and all the stories we're covering is available at our website, voanews.com. From Washington, I'm Marissa Melton, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Diane Roberts. Heavy fighting rocked Sudan's capital Sunday for a third week as tens of thousands have fled the bloody turmoil, and a former prime minister warned of the nightmare risk of a descent into full-scale civil war. This as the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, said a formal ceasefire agreement, which was due to formally expire at midnight, would be extended for 72 hours. United States citizens boarded an American Navy ship for their evacuation from Port Sudan on Sunday after being stranded in the country since fighting broke out earlier this month. U.S. officials told Reuters the USNS Brunswick, a fast transport vessel, was in Port Sudan temporarily. Despite the fighting, emergency aid supplies are reaching Sudan. Here's VOA's Joe Ramsey.
An aircraft carrying 8 tons of emergency medical supplies landed in Sudan to help hospitals devastated by more than 2 weeks of fighting between forces loyal to rival generals. The International Committee of the Red Cross said Sunday the supplies are enough to help treat more than 1,000 war wounded. A National Doctors Association has said more than 2/3 of hospitals in areas with active fighting are out of service because of a shortage of medical supplies, health workers, water, and electricity. Joe Ramsey, VOA News.
Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. said his meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday was essential in advancing his country's national interest and strengthening the, quote, very important alliance, end quote, between Manila and Washington. Before leaving for his 4-day official visit to Washington, Marcos said on Sunday he would convey to Mr. Biden his determination to forge an even stronger relationship with the United States to address the concerns of our times, end quote. This is VOA News. Pope Francis departed Hungary Sunday after his 3-day visit. Before he left, tens of thousands of people filled a Budapest square to see him. Speaking to crowds, Francis has urged Hungarians to open their doors to others with a plea for Europe to welcome migrants and the poor. The Pope has also called for an end to Russia's invasion of its neighbor as the Vatican grows concerned for the plight of Ukraine. Francis prayed for peace in Ukraine and a future of hope, not war, a future full of cradles, not tombs. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's spoken with his French counterpart about the delivery of more supplies. AP correspondent Lawrence Brooks reports.
In his daily address, Zelensky claimed Emmanuel Macron had confirmed the supply of requested support, without going into specifics. Zelensky then expressed his gratitude to France, the President, and other Western allies for their continued support of Ukraine and its people. The President's praise comes just days after NATO said its allies and partner countries had sent 98% of promised combat vehicles as well as other equipment to Ukraine. The added artillery is expected to give Kyiv a bigger punch as it contemplates launching its counteroffensive. I'm Lawrence Brooks.
Ukraine remains in control of an important area of Bakhmut, a military spokesperson said on Saturday, as the head of Russia's mercenary Wagner group threatened to withdraw some of his troops from the eastern city if Moscow did not send more ammunition. Reuters correspondent Zachary Gelman reports.
Ukrainian forces are still in control of a key supply route into the embattled city of Bakhmut, according to a military spokesperson, while a Russian mercenary commander publicly criticized Moscow and demanded more ammunition to finish the fight. Russian forces have been trying for 10 months to punch their way into the shattered remains of what was once a city of 70,000. Fighting has been block by block and house by house, with both sides describing it as a, quote, meat grinder. Kyiv has pledged to defend Bakhmut, which Russia sees as a stepping stone to attack other cities.
That was Reuters correspondent Zachary Goldman. The Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy, met with the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset, Amir Ohana, in Jerusalem Sunday. Ohana thanked McCarthy for his continued support for Israel, while McCarthy talked of the two nations' shared values. McCarthy will address the Israeli Knesset on Monday, making him only the second U.S. Speaker to do so. I'm Diane Roberts, VOA News.
And I'm Dan Novak.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. The UN on Monday warned more than 750,000 people could flee fighting in Sudan, where gun battles and explosions again shook the capital in violation of the truce agreed between warring generals. The chaos and bloodshed, now in their third week, have already sparked an exodus of tens of thousands of Sudanese to neighboring countries, including Egypt, Chad, and the Central African Republic. The U.S. State Department said Monday that government-facilitated convoys have successfully enabled groups of citizens, their family members, and nationals from partner countries to arrive safely in Port Sudan since Saturday.
From there, we have been assisting U.S. citizens and others who are eligible with onward travel to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where additional U.S. personnel are positioned to assist with consular and emergency services.
Deputy spokesperson Vedant Patel says the convoys have assisted over 700 people. Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands wounded over 16 days of battle since disputes between the Sudanese army and paramilitary rapid support forces. The White House estimates Russian casualties in Ukraine have gone up sharply in the past several months. AP correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Since December,
we estimate that Russia has suffered more than 100,000 casualties, including over 20,000 killed in action.
National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says it's stunning.
It's 3 times the number of killed in action that the United States faced on the Guadalcanal campaign in World War II, and that was over the course of 5 months as well.
In November, the Pentagon estimated Russia had suffered well over 100,000 killed or wounded in the war's first 8 months. Sagar Magani, Washington.
This is VOA News. Kenyan investigators began the first autopsies on over 100 people linked to a doomsday cult, Reuters correspondent Rachel Faber reports.
The bodies of 9 children exhumed in eastern Kenya showed signs of starvation and asphyxiation, according to a government pathologist. The deaths amount to one of the worst cult-related tragedies in recent history, and the death toll is expected to rise further, as the Kenyan Red Cross says more than 300 people have been reported missing. The Kenyan government says children account for most of the bodies recovered so far. On Sunday, President William Ruto said he would appoint a judicial commission of inquiry this week to investigate what happened.
Reuters correspondent Rachel Faber. In Cameroon on Monday, hundreds of thousands of workers marched on the May 1st International Labor Day, calling for wage increases amid price hikes fueled by Russia's war on Ukraine. Moki Edwin Kendezka reports from Yandui.
Workers say since Russia's invasion of Ukraine 15 months ago, many households are going hungry because prices for commodities exported by the two countries, such as wheat, maize, and fertilizer, have increased by 40%. The price of fuel has also increased by more than 15%. The government gave workers a 5% pay raise in February, but workers say with inflation so high, the raise is negligible. Moki Edwin Kinzaka for VOA News, Yaoundé, Cameroon.
U.S. President Joe Biden has invited congressional leaders to meet with him next week. AP correspondent Norman Hall reports.
Administration officials have confirmed that President Biden phoned all 4 congressional leaders and invited them to a May 9th meeting at the White House. The sit-down is a sign of rising pressure to raise the nation's debt cap. The Treasury Department is warning of a default as soon as June 1st. Economists have warned of a financial catastrophe if the government of the world's largest economy is unable to pay its bills. It's still unclear how the president and Congress can resolve the matter. Republicans are demanding spending cuts of $4.8 trillion over 10 years. Democratic leaders want to decouple the debt limit from the budget process. Norman Hall, Washington.
E. Jean Carroll, the writer accusing Donald Trump of rape and defamation on Monday, denied making up her claims to drive publicity for her memoir, testifying in New York federal court after a judge denied Trump's request for a mistrial. Carroll said she wasn't seeking attention through appearances on TV and podcasts, while acknowledging they were an important driver of book sales. I'm Joe Ramsey.